Hello, I'm Lisa Tyler. I'm the host of Senior Connections. This is the show that's brought to you every month by Senior Resources, your area agency on aging. And we come together to talk about all kinds of issues related to older adults and those who love them and care for them. And it can be issues ranging from Medicare, prescription benefits, caregiving, to what we're going to talk about this month, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what we're doing at Senior Resources about that. And I'm really excited. It's June when we're taping this. It might not be June when you're watching it. It's the start of summer and warmer weather. And it's also Pride Month, and it's Juneteenth. And I'm wearing a purple safety pin because the other day was World Elder Abuse Awareness Month. That day, and we recognize all of that. But we're specifically going to talk about a couple of those events, Pride Month and Juneteenth, and a lot of other examples of some diversity, equity, and inclusion with two of my colleagues that I'm really excited to see, Carla Benton and Simon Hookenga. It's wonderful to see both of you. Thanks for joining me. So they are both very active in the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee that we just started in the last 12 months, really, I think, at Senior Resources. And so we're going to hear about some of the work that they do along with a lot of our colleagues and the reasons that we're doing it. So we'll start a little bit about learning about each of you and what you do on a daily basis. So Simon, tell us about your role at Senior Resources.
Well, I currently am an RN supports coordinator with the Targeted Care Management Program at Senior Resources. I've been working there for about 2.5 years, and the general focus of my position is to help seniors stay independent as possible in their chosen living environment, whether that be home or living or with family.
Okay.
And just setting up services that allow them to maintain that independence.
Wonderful. And do you work on a team with somebody, or is it? I'm always we have so many different programs, so I know that we have teams in some programs, and I never am really sure exactly in which one what an RN role is because it's different.
Yeah. Well, my particular role, I'm more like sort of independent.
Okay.
And I work more like one-on-one. My participants tend to be a little more medically complex than maybe the average senior looking for those in-home services.
How many participants do you work with usually? What's your caseload?
Right now, my TCM caseload is about 14, but that might increase. Okay. But I also split my time with the case management. Okay. I'm a secondary on a lot of those participants.
Okay. So you build up a close relationship with those participants.
Yes. I mean, we try to be sort of a all-inclusive type of approach. It doesn't necessarily have to be something related to services. Sometimes it's just they need more information about something that has come up, or helping them connect with their healthcare providers and service providers. And it's just very sort of individualized. It just depends on the needs of what participant I'm working with.
No two older adults are alike.
Nope, everybody's a snowflake.
Exactly. Hey, Carla, tell us a little bit about you.
So I work with Senior Resources as the grants manager, and so I don't work directly with the participants, but instead I work with the organizations that we partner with. And so that's also an important role as far as that we learn to respect diversity, et cetera. And previously, I've been here for 2 years. Previously, I worked with a local home care company, both as home health aide and as their resource manager. And then in my other lives, I was a teacher and a nonprofit administrator working with overseas and cross-cultural programs. So that's my background.
Wonderful. Well, so let's talk a little bit about Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, or we call it DEI. So we're going to abbreviate it as DEI because it's a real mouthful otherwise. So we launched that in 2020. I can't even remember 2020 is just kind of a blur to me, as I think it is to everybody. But it was partly in response to some of the events that happened in the spring. And I remember talking about it at a leadership level about trying to create a safe space for conversation, because even though we were all working remotely, perhaps that was a greater reason for the need for it, because we weren't able to be together in person to process a lot of the unrest, and there was a lot of racial unrest last spring. And I don't want to rehash all of that, but that was where a lot of this was really born. And we had a cultural competency committee where we talked about, making sure we were respectful of your things, but this is kind of a much deeper dive into it. So Carla, you chair that committee, which we're grateful for, and you've been a very active member of it, and we've probably, anytime I've been in it, it can be from 10 to 20 people there, and it's never exactly the same group, but I think there's a pretty core group of people, and pretty representative of our agency, which I think is great. So what's your understanding from, and why did you volunteer to be involved in the leadership of that? I know personally what some of your passions are, but talk to me a little bit about how it came about in your mind.
Well, first of all, I think the reason that we have the committee is because Senior Resources, one of their main missions is to provide lifelong independence and lifelong dignity. And I think we can't be very good at providing lifelong dignity if we don't understand what dignity means in each participant's context. What does dignity mean for you in your context? So I think understanding that is really important. And Senior Resources had an active committee, but it was, like you said, not quite as deep a dive. And,
lots of policies.
And they had and have excellent policy documents that guide our practices as an organization. And I think they're excellent guides, but we needed, I think, something more active. And so I think for each of us, in both as an organization as a whole and individually, to holistically pursue understanding others, to pursue understanding diversity, what it means in ourselves, what it means for others, and inclusivity, to be a place of really intentional belonging, that people feel like they belong. And I think the funnest thing it's fun for me, that's come out of the committee as it's grown and become what it's becoming is that people are able to come to these meetings and be really humble and open and ready to learn about, understanding that we all have blind spots. We all have things we don't know that we don't know. And we each have different privileges, but we each have different places in our lives where we've seen or felt oppressions. And to be able to share and understand it, becoming diverse and inclusive is not something you can just create. It's a gradual learning process for everyone, and I've just loved being a part of it.
Simon, what about you? Why did you get involved, and what do you enjoy about the committee?
I think, the reason I think I got involved is, like you said, 2020 was opened up a lot of things that people tend not to maybe want to focus on. And I think it just gave a safe environment to sort of to be able to just admit what you don't know and that you'd like to learn more. And I think it helps people just understand each other and hopefully find common ground. I think when you dive into diversity, equity, and inclusion, what you discover is that people are different, but a lot of ways people are the same. They have the same struggles, and they need, for better or worse, they need the help. They need in some cases the same kind of help, like whether it be in home or connecting with healthcare providers, or just to be more conscious and aware of how people view themselves.
And there's, I know just the things meetings I've been in, there's a lot of trust issues sometimes based on, could be generations of disparities that have been there, or not being treated well if you're of a certain race or a certain religion or something. And I think it's important to know that while we're going to talk, here for a little bit about about sexual orientation and those kind of things. And it's not about just dealing with people who are black. It's or just who are gay. It's about religious differences. We've had it's cultural differences. We've had conversations about people about taking off shoes in homes and things like that. There's so much diversity, and that's where I think early on that was one of the big eye openers for me. Is when I thought of it, I thought, of course, of these few things, but there's so much more. And I don't deal with participants in my role, so I think that there's a lot to learn in that. So I think it's important for us to note that while we get a lot out of it personally, it wasn't designed just to focus on what we as staff members get out of it, but also about our older adult population. So I'm going to give a couple statistics before we talk. So according to SAGE, which is a group that's dedicated to advocacy and services for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, plus LGBTQ plus, by 2030, there will be about 7 million LGBT, the abbreviation we're using again, older adults, which is an increase from around 3 million currently. And those are kind of guesstimates. They don't have really hard statistics about that. But I think that increase is significant because 2030 is not that far off. We're talking 8-9 years that is going to more than double. And their statistics show a lot of things that are concerning and disturbing, and we just heard a presentation that affirms some of these. LGBT older adults are twice as likely to be single and live alone. They're 4 times less likely to have children, and they're more likely to face poverty and homelessness, and they have poor physical and mental health. And there's a lot of reasons that we know to be true for that. But so one of the things we just heard in this great presentation by an intern of ours, Avery Henschel, we'll give her a little shout out. Good job, Avery. She gave us a wonderful staff presentation about this from her studies. Families of choice are a really big thing. So we really learned a lot about and talk a lot about how this can impact a generation that lived in the closet, as the saying is. They couldn't be who they truly were because of all kinds of historical reasons. I mean, including military having a ban on gays serving in governmental, roles and things like that. And we learned some fascinating history about that. But all of that impacts what you do as a sports coordinator, because whether somebody feels they can be open, whether they've got family, because I don't know what your assessment questions are, but a family member may be a family of choice. It might not be they might not have had a child. They may have family that doesn't know they're gay or that isn't accepting about that. So it impacts caregiving, because if they don't have children, they're relying on their families of choice or other networks. There's increased concerns about social isolation, reluctance to reach out sometimes to senior centers or meal programs or things if they're fearful of being discriminated against. They may have a history. Housing may have been a problem. So there's really a lot of issues that I'm sure that we're dealing with more, and that's a lot of why we also have all these conversations. And then the things like being respectful of somebody's religious tradition, and whether they're eating meat or not, whether they've got a holiday. We've got a calendar with our paid holidays based on a Christian calendar, right? And not everybody celebrates it. So it's really been very eye-opening for me, and I know for a lot of members on there. But tell us a little bit about how we're trying to educate staff about some of these things, both of you, we've learned in the committee and in the presentations like we had at a recent staff meeting.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just say in a general context, and you can elaborate on it, just in a general context, we have a monthly discussion group among our staff. We also have a monthly planning group for what we're going to plan to work on, but we have offered staff multiple resources, multiple opportunities to engage in the community. We've had speakers present, and at each staff meeting, I offer a little snippet of what we've been learning as a group, so that just little by little, we become more aware. We're learning to uncover differences and biases and assumptions that we have within ourselves, and resources to learn how to act upon them.
Well, I remember recently, a few months ago, I guess we had a speaker from Servicios de Esperanza, bringing out a little in Spanish, but Services of Hope, which is a local nonprofit that's dedicated to the Spanish-speaking community. And one of the things I remember her talking about was that cultural I guess I'm saying cultural, and it might be the wrong word, but the cultural reliance on family and a reluctance to sometimes reach out for help. Have you run into any of that kind? Not to put you on the spot, but you're the one out of the three of us that deals with that has an active role with participants. Do you see much of that, or?
There's like a spectrum. I mean, some older adults or participants, they have a lot of family involvement, a lot of informal supports, and some have none. And it's everywhere in between. And a lot of times with participants that maybe don't have a blood relation, it is that chosen family that steps in and helps them, attain that goal of remaining independent and having somebody to, rely on for those things that you would call up your son or your daughter to do. And so I think it's very important to just sort of remember that everybody's different. Everybody starts with different resources, and it's just a process of trying to, the resources that they do have, make the most out of them, and then add the resources that they don't, so that they can, like Carla was saying, have dignity and live the way that they choose to live.
One of the things I really took away from Aveley's presentation was when she said, when we do assessments or things, to ask the question, who are the people most important to you, rather, and I don't know how you ask that, maybe that is how you already ask it, but rather than ask about family or whatever, because no matter what the reasons, there are people who either don't have family or they're not close to their family, and it may be that their family is across the country, and while you could pick up the phone and talk, they're really not involved day to day in Mom or Aunt Sue's life or whatever. But it's just those little things about different ways to ask questions, to be respectful, and to make sure that we're representing everybody, that I think has been really, a phenomenal awareness that I hope our whole staff is getting because of this. And I think that those presentations are really great. So I want to talk a little bit, we're in the month of June, and Juneteenth, while we're taping that's just a few days away. I have to admit, and you said this in our recent staff meeting, Juneteenth wasn't something I ever learned about in school. So, Simon, do you know a little bit about that you could share, and the significance, or either one of you? It was really in the last year or year and a half that I ever had heard that.
Yeah, well, for me, the same thing. I mean, I never learned about Juneteenth or any of that stuff in school, and that's not something that anybody was even really talking about,
right,
or referencing.
But yeah, you said it was the oldest.
It was the longest standing African American celebration that has sort of been celebrated throughout our history, although it's just coming to the forefront for many people.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about it.
Well, the reason it's called Juneteenth is because in 1863 was the Emancipation Proclamation freeing individuals from slavery, and that's the date that we learn in our history lessons. Mm-hmm. But in actuality, it wasn't until June 19th, and that's the word is the combination of June and 19th to be called June 19th. Juneteenth is that it wasn't until the final group of people who were enslaved in Galveston, Texas, in 2 years later, 1865, that they learned that they had been freed, which seems funny, but it's not funny for them because, 2 years the country had been going on and they were still living under the tyranny of slavery. And so that feels like a better true freedom day. And so it's definitely a celebration day for the African American community because it's a day celebrating, legal freedom, although there's been obviously battles for all sorts of other types of freedoms that are ongoing, as we're very well aware.
Right. So that's interesting because I admittedly do not remember a lot of the history that I learned because that was a long time ago. But in my mind, I do remember Civil War, 1861 to 1865. I completely forgot that the Emancipation Proclamation was 2 years earlier. So in my mind, well, that's when it must have been. So maybe that's why we learned that date, is because that's officially, and everybody found that out. I don't know. It's, you know, I say this to my kids, and I've said this to lots of people, you know, it's just a fact that the winners write the history, right? So we don't hear a lot of this, all of this that's just been fascinating to me. I mean, honestly, we could almost spend full-time, you know, I could spend 40 hours a week learning about so much more about African American history, or, you know, the Latinos in the country, and or the Native Americans. There's so much. My daughter's learning about that right now, and just sends me text how mad she is at the president at the time for what they did to Native Americans. And so it's just been a really eye-opening thing, which I think has got to really benefit our participants as well as us as individuals and as an organization. So let's talk a little bit about what the committee does in their meetings. You meet a couple of times a month, and what do you do in the planning? What kind of things, how does that work, the interaction, and what kind of things have we done in the past?
So once a month we have a planning meeting, and that's usually everyone is welcome, but it's usually a smaller core group. And we look at we of course Google what are the holidays in the upcoming months, what are the, National Day of whatever, those sort of events. But we also talk about what's going on in our worlds, what's going on in current events, what's going on, emotionally for us right now. How are we feeling? What's going on, and how are we feeling about it? And we try to guide our future discussions based on those things. So we try to, pull in a variety, make sure that we're as a team not just focusing on one or two issues, but being broad enough and looking at a wide variety of topics, which we really have had a good start on, and feel pretty good about, just how we've really attempted to be, have both, breadth and depth in what we discuss. So those are the planning meetings. And then once a month, we have a separate discussion meeting, and those discussion meetings are attended by a lot more people. And oftentimes, people attend based on what the upcoming discussion is. And it's been very good, those healthy discussions that we've been having. And when people come because that topic is really important to them, then they have a lot to offer the rest of the group. We have a lot to learn from them, and we've loved those discussions.
Mm-hmm. And we try to not make them political, because we that's part of our diversity too. We know that we've got people of all political persuasions working for us, and certainly our participants. Mm-hmm. And while we can't bring our politics into a participant, thing, it's the same thing. Sometimes they come into it because of something that's going on in the world or in our country, but it's supposed to be welcoming for everyone, and I feel like it has been.
Yeah, and as a team, we have a document that we created, and that is evolving over time. We call it the Protected Space Contract, where each time we enter the group, we begin with a protected space contract that we've written, and that continues to evolve as we need to tweak it or grow. And it involves what we say, how we say it, that we're being respectful of all members, and that we don't bring political assumptions into the group. And it's gone well. And sometimes we do jump back to the contract and say, yeah, let's remember, that we all have blind spots, and let's be respectful, because we don't know what we don't know, and so let's learn together. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Has it been, Simon, any more challenging during the pandemic when you haven't been able to see your participants in person in a really long time? Yeah. Are there differences culturally or diversity with just having to, because you're doing it by phone? Has that been more challenging in any ways that are related to any of that, or just, I'm trying to think whether there would be, but hearing can be a really big issue for some people to do some things like that.
Well, especially with the elderly population, hearing and your senses are, phone conversations can be difficult, especially if the participant has hearing loss or a hearing aid. There's definitely sort of a barrier to communication, and you have to be very sort of focused and maybe repeat questioned several times just to make sure that you're getting the correct interpretation of what they're saying. And I also think that, like in the terms of the elderly population, you know, it really is added to the sense of isolation, social isolation. I mean, these were people that were socially isolated before the pandemic, and it just sort of exacerbates. And social isolation is, you know, a challenge for a lot of gay, lesbian community, any sort of marginalized community can suffer.
Do you think the fact that you've had to do more frequent because before you might have only seen somebody in person, are you doing phone calls more often? Do you think that helps in any way, or is it a bit more of a hindrance that they're not seeing you eye to eye?
I think it is. I think it is a sort of a hindrance because a lot of the participants sort of look forward to that. You know, that month. I make monthly. Before the pandemic, I made monthly home calls on my participants, and you know, that was a time that, socialize. They could, sort of interact with somebody. With, I might be the only person they see in a month. So. Yeah, it's been very challenging.
Yes, I would imagine. So we've got about 2.5 minutes left. Carla, tell us a little bit about some of the other topics that the DEI group has discussed that have been, kind of stood out in your mind.
Sure. Yeah, so we've discussed actually quite a few different things since we really started kicking off in this past September, so less than a year. We've talked about seniors with disabilities. We've talked about Hispanic heritage and how to serve individuals who are Hispanic, Latinx, or Spanish-speaking background. We've talked about Native American heritage and current issues that Indigenous peoples face. We've talked about pronouns and adding pronouns to our email addresses, adding pronouns to our Zoom screens, and becoming much more aware that other people may use different pronouns than we expected. We started an I Have a Dream wall, talking about what our dreams are that sprouted itself after Martin Luther King Day, Martin Luther King Jr. And an interesting thing that happened, I like to see the places where policy has changed or our actions as an organization have changed. One of those ways is the adding of pronouns. That's something new. Another thing is adding Spanish language materials. And another one, we always have excellent trainings that are offered to us as staff, and we had one where the speaker had a blind spot that a lot of us recognized. And because we had an active team to discuss that, it turned it into an actionable item. We wrote a very polite and helpful letter to this person, and they wrote a very excellent, polite letter back and thanked us, and it was a really healthy exchange. But we helped that trainer to remove those blind spots from future presentations, and it felt good to take action, but also to do it in a way that created unity.
Right.
So if that felt good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to interrupt because we were just getting rolling with some of that, but we're at the end of our time. So I hope that you have realized that Senior Resources is really committed to trying to better ourselves as individuals, as an organization, because we truly are here to serve all older adults and their chosen families, whoever those people may be. So we'll see you next month. Carla and Simon, thank you so much for a really great conversation. We could have kept going for a while. You can find out more by calling our options counselors at 231-733-3585, or if you can't remember that, you can always call 211. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.